Hello and welcome back. Now, in the last video we have created our model setup, our relationships, and now we can use them. And let's actually calculate our first measures and calculate columns in Power BI. So there are two ways which I would like to show you here, as I mentioned, which are measures as well as calculated columns. So let's dive into that. At first, let me go to the report view. And now let's actually go to transform data and go to transform data to open our Power Query editor. The first thing I'd like to show you how we can create calculated columns in Power BI. So if I go to my sales table here, I select this one here, then I can simply, to calculate my sales, multiply the quantity column times the price column, right? Because this is actually the sales which then we have generated for each of our entries here in the sales table. So we can simply go to add column here, and under add column, there is the option to add a custom column. So if you click on custom column here, create a new column in this table based on a custom formula. This is what we want to do. So we click on it, and then we see that a new custom column window appears here, which allows us to specify the name of the column. Let's say we name this total sales column. Okay, I name it column here as an additional name here. And then what we can do here is simply write our formula. And we can relate our formula to specific, in this case, columns we have in the sales table. So this is the list of all the unique column names, which you see up there as well. And for us, we can simply double click on a specific field. So let's say we want to multiply the price. So we can double click on the price. And then we simply use a multiple symbol here. You can see currently token literal is expected. So the formula itself currently is not valid. But of course, we want to multiply it by another field. And that is why we can choose a quantity here. And there are various ways. You can either type in the quantity yourself in here, or you can double click on the field, or you can simply select the field and go to insert. That also works. And you can see that now there are no syntax errors have been detected, and then our formula is valid in here. So that's how you can actually create easy formulas in or here in the Power Query editor. Simply multiply specific columns, and also notice that the columns are always put in brackets here. Okay. So if we go now to OK, what we see is we get an additional column here, which is simply this 7,392 is simply 4 times 1,848. So we simply multiply those two, in this case those two cells, for each row in the table, and then we get our result. And you can see currently this is not the correct number format, but because these are all absolute numbers, I can simply go in here and say this is a whole number. Otherwise you could also use a decimal number, but here whole number is fine for me. And now you can see I got my total sales column as well as the correct data type. And if we now say under home, close and apply, that would simply mean that we apply those changes. This column will be added to our model, and then we can use it in our report. So if I go to close and apply it here, then I can just wait until the application has been detected as well as implemented. And now if we simply go into our sales table, maybe make this smaller, and select our sales table, we will see here a new column, which is this one here, which is total sales column, right? So if I make this bigger, this here, so you can see exactly that's the name we specified, and we have this column now available for us, and we can use it in our report. So if I tick this option, because it's a numeric field, we already know that by default we get a bar chart. So let's actually tick this, and let's just see, and we get our bar chart here. Just in case we want to change it, simply detect the value itself, we can select the chart, and let's take a look at the card here just to see what number it is, and it's 26 million. Or in detail, if we go under the formatting option here, we can select this one here and say for the category itself, do we want to turn it off? Yes, maybe you'd like to make it a little bigger, so for the total sales itself. And then for the data label here, let's go with display units and set them to none just to see the exact number, which in this case is 25,661,209. And of course we can format this maybe a little bit more, so select the column itself and then go under the formatting options, and let's actually tick this currency symbol just to see it as a dollar number in here, yeah? Like that. Okay, so this is the number we get using this calculate column. So that's fine, and that's one option we can use. And also, let's actually maybe take this and analyze this in a table. We can do this by simply now choosing one of our other tables. For instance, here our product table. So we can tick this one and then go with the product names. At first, be sure that you click somewhere on the blank canvas to deselect this one, this measure, this visual, and then you go with the product name, you tick it, and you can see now you have a list of all the products, and now you can also use your total sales column, which you have calculated, tick it, and you see actually now all the sales for each specific product in our dataset. I can also maybe, let me select it and drag it maybe on top here. And also let me make it a little bit bigger so you can see it this better on your screen. So let me take this here and go under the value section here and say for the number, let's specify maybe 15 for now, okay? So hopefully you can see that. Now we got all the products here as well as the total sales for each product. And in total, at the bottom here, we can see we got 25,661,209, which is exactly the same number as we have here. So that's fine. Now, the reason why this works here, so that we see basically here a breakdown of our sales for each product, is because we have set up the model relationship. So this is crucial here. If we go to the model here, we have from our products table the relationship here to our sales table. And only because we have set up this relationship here correctly between those two tables, the option here and this works properly. So we get the correct sales numbers for the products. If we would not do this, if we go back to the model view, and let's actually maybe let me right click here and say I would like to delete this relationship, just to show it to you. I delete it, that now the product itself has no relationship anymore to the sales table. And this means that now the product can't be used to filter the data in the sales table. So if we take a look at our view here, our report view, we see that now for each product we get exactly the same value. And this value is simply the total amount of sales. So the 25 million, as we see here as well. Because we have deleted the relationship between the products table, where the product name column is coming from, and the sales table, where the total sales column is coming from. And because there's no relationship, then Power BI simply returns the total value for this. So it's also helpful to know later on if you have set up your own model and for some weird reason you get the same value for all the different kinds of products in our case you have, so whatever kind of dimension you use, then this is a sign that you have to check your relations in the model view, whether they are set up correctly. And if I use my product ID again, and I drag it and drop it onto product ID there, like this, and I set up the relationship again, just a second, there it is, it's one-to-many, and the columns are correct, that's fine. If we go back to the report view here, we now can see that we got the correct number of total sales here for each product again. Okay? So one additional thing here, which might be not exactly as we wanted to have it, is that the product name, as you can see here currently, is not sorted correctly. Because it starts with 1, then 10, then 100, and so on. So actually what I would expect when I want to sort it is I would like to see product 1, then product 2, product 3, and so on, right? So a correct sorting. So also here a little trick for you. What you can do is then you go to the data view here, and you first of course select the product table. I've already done this here, so you can see the product here. And then what you do is you simply click on the product name, which you currently display in here, right? So this is this one, the product name column, and you can sort this column. And you can sort this column based on another column, because the original sorting here is correct. So 1, and then 10, and then 100, and then 101, and so on. So this is the correct sorting, because 10, so the 1 here at the first letter, comes before the 2, of course. That is why the sorting is alphabetical sorting practically. So what we can do is we can simply go here and select the specific column, the product name, and then there's an option up there under, in this case, the table tools, sort by column here. And if you do this, and say, I'd like to sort my product name based on the product ID, if you click this here, now the sorting will happen. And now if you go back to the report view, now you can see you got product 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. So it's just for you just to know that you can sort a specific column, in this case the product name, based on another column, which makes sense. And in our case, we're referring to the product ID, because the product ID order is correct, and that's why we had to sort the product name based on this product ID order, and then it displays here correctly in the right order. Okay? So this is it for sorting as well as for the calculated column. I just want to give you here an additional option, which is the so-called measure in Power BI. We already talked about this at the beginning when we made a tour in the Power BI interface. You see that under calculations, there's also new measure. And also under modeling, there's the option to create a new measure. So measures are different from calculate column in a way that measures will always be calculated on the fly. That means this calculated column which we have created there in our sales table, let's actually make this smaller here, this one here. This is actually created as a fixed column, which means if you go to the data view, for instance, you can also see that in the sales table, if you select it, there's a new column which we have created, which is this one here, the total sales column. Now, if I go back up there, we can also now create the same or get the same result as a measure. So in order to do this, we can either click on measure here under home, we can go to modeling and click on measure here under modeling, or the third option would be to right click on a table here on the fields list, right click, and also there's an option to create new measure, for instance. So if you click on new measure here, then what happens is you can see here a little calculator icon and also the name measure, and this measure can now be specified here. So this is where we can write our DAX here. And here we could simply type in a name, let's say total sales, like that, is equal to, and now we need some DAX functions. And there's a DAX function called SUMX. Now this SUMX, and the great thing here is that these functions always give you a little hint what they do for you. So here the SUMX returns the sum of an expression evaluated for each row in a table. And think about that. This is exactly what we need, because what we did when we used the total sales column, our calculated column, we would expect that the measure itself, or in this case the calculated column, what it was doing, it was simply taking each quantity and price in each row, so the two cells, and multiply them. And this is also what we want to do here. That is why we use the SUMX function. The X function itself is an iterator function, so all the X functions in Power BI, remember that, are iterator functions, and this means they iterate over a table. And iteration means they go through this table row by row. And this is what we need, because we want to go through the sales table, so our table will be the sales table. If you type in SA, you already see here the table itself, as well as a few additional functionalities here, functions, which we talk about later on. But here, if you select the sales table, you can press the tab key to do this, and then we need to give it an expression. And in this expression, because we have selected the sales table, we can give it columns from the sales table. And we do exactly the same as what we have done with the total sales. We multiply the price with the quantity. So if you type in here price, for instance, price, you see that now it's referring down there to sales and then in brackets price. That simply means it is from the sales table the column price. And you can tick this, pressing tab, and then we multiply this with, from the sales table, the quantity. So if you type in quantity here, you already see there's again a little table symbol, and also it's relating to the sales table. That's why the table name is always first, and then in brackets the specific field, which is the quantity. And if you tick this like that, you can then simply close the parenthesis. So what this function here is actually doing for us, this measure, is simply it's iterating row by row through the sales table, and for each row it's simply look up the price, it then looks up the quantity, and it multiplies those two. And the sum at the end simply then adds up all those multiplications. So all the sales for each row in a data set, in this case in the sales table, and then it simply sums them up. And this is how we get the total sales. And if we press enter, we'll see that now Power BI is calculating this measure for us. It's done. We can also see here that is a measure because we have this little calculator symbol here. And by the way, I think in the later Power BI versions this might change, so it might look a little bit different. Just want to mention it here. But we have still some kind of label which tells us that this is a measure. And now, if we take a look, let's actually click in here and just check whether we got exactly the same. Okay. So we currently have here our total sales column, and now let's actually tick our total sales measure. So if we tick this here, we can see that we got exactly the same result. And let me actually format this here so you can see that even better. So if I click on this, same is true here. I click on the dollar symbol just to format the measure properly, and then I can see here I get exactly the same number as here, right? So you can see that the measure here, the total sales measure, delivers exactly the same result as the total sales column. And the same is true for the total here. And you can also see it if I, for instance, use another KPI card here, and if I tick my total sales number here, I get exactly the same result as above. The only reason is that this currently looks a little bit different is the formatting. So if you select the card, go in here and say for the data label here that you choose in specific none, then you see exactly the same numbers here, right? So the measure itself can deliver exactly the same result here as our calculated column. Now you might ask, when should I use which? So if I can get the same result, why should I use a calculated column, and when should I use a table? Or in this case a measure, sorry, as the total sales. Now the point is that whenever you can, use measures, because measures do not clutter up your model. So because you have to think about that. Whenever you create a calculated column, like the one we have done here in our sales table, which is this one here, basically what we did is we had then a new column in our sales table, and this is only additional storage which we need in our model. So the more calculated columns you create, then the bigger the model size gets. On the other hand, for the measures like the total sales here, we had no current additional column which is created. The measure itself will be always calculated on the fly. So the measure itself only stores the data in a way that if we visualize something, like for instance our table here for the product 1, then only if we put the total sales inside here, then this measure gets calculated correctly for, in this case, the product number 1. But otherwise, the measures do not create additional clutter or do not require additional storage in our model. That is why I would always recommend that go with measures. The only reason why also calculated columns exist is because sometimes you need to have a column, a calculated column, as a dimension in a table, for instance. So what measures can't do, but calculated columns can do, is something like that. For instance, the product name here, like product 1 and so on, displaying like that, this can only be done with calculated columns. This cannot be done with measures. Measures can only return values, like for instance these ones here. But calculated columns can only also return something like that. So for instance a string value which then can be used in a table, for instance, or in a pie chart. So this is something where you need calculated columns. But most of the time measures are the better way to go, and this is why we will use measures a lot in the course, or also in the next couple of videos. Okay? So that's it actually for this video. There was a lot of new stuff, but hopefully you were able to follow along. Just in case you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, I can't wait to see you in the next video. Until then, best guys.